Welcome to this week's edition of In the Clubhouse with EMD. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. So for today in the Clubhouse, we're going to talk about the me versus we on the visit, and something that I know that we've both run into. I don't want to necessarily call it a pet peeve, but something I think that parents specifically need to be aware of as they go through this process, and specifically when you get on campus for some of those visits and some of the terminology that you use. So I'm gonna kick it over to you, big man, and get us started on the me versus we when it comes to visits.
Yeah, the visits where we start asking questions and you're sitting in front of an office or in front of a desk and there's coaches in there. There could be one, there could be multiple. I think can be a little pressure packed. It can be a little intimidating. Depending on how many you've been through. I think your level of comfortability is a little bit higher the more you do them. Obviously, it's like anything else. The more you do it, the more comfortable you are doing it. But from a coaching standpoint, when I was coaching, one of the things that kind of started raising some flags for me as I got older, and the more I did it was, when everybody is in the office and mom and dad are in there saying, well, we're looking at this program and we're looking at this and we were offered this here and we think this, and the kid doesn't really say a whole lot. It starts raising questions in the coach's mind of who is really driving the ship in this process, how vested in this process is the student athlete, and how interested is the student athlete in really even being here. Because when there's not a lot being asked from the player, like they're the ones that are ultimately going to be making the decision to, or maybe they're not, and they should be, but they're the ones that are ultimately going to be ending up at that college that is chosen. So, you really want to make it, especially from a coaching, from a playing time, from a roster, from a pure baseball and what's going on, and from a development standpoint and strength and conditioning, all that things like that. The student athlete should really be the one that's driving the ship on those questions. The we part, obviously the parents, you should 100% ask questions about the support system that is involved for or is in place at the school for the student athletes, from an academic standpoint, from a health standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, from the laundry list of everything from the support system. Like, you should know that stuff. You want to make sure that when you're sending your kid to a college, they have everything at their disposal that they're going to need should they need it when they're there. And obviously the financial aid end of stuff. Like, it's not lost on coaches that, the parents are going to be the ones that are going to be footing the bill for college. So when it gets to the financial aid end of stuff, like, absolutely, mom, dad, parent, guardian, whatever, jump in there and ask the questions it is and get the information that you need on those specific topics. And it doesn't mean that you can't ask some questions along the way. Because look, at the end of the day, they're 16, 17-year-old kids. There's going to be questions that they might have that they might forget when they're sitting down, that you may have asked at another visit. Like, it's fine to say, like, hey, we asked, we went to a visit as a family to X school and we asked this question, like, we forgot, like, what do you think? Like, that's fine. But when it's the driving force is mom and dad or the parent guardian asking all the questions, it starts raising, some flags for coaches as to whether or not that student athlete is as interested and as invested in the process as they would want, because they're the one that are going to be coached by this coach for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, to put it bluntly, like, they're recruiting the kid. They're not recruiting you, but as a parent, you can hurt the recruiting process by making it about you. And I mean, I know that sounds like a little bit blunt, but it's true. Like, we've been in this before where you get in a visit with a kid and the visit becomes about the parents, and it's a turnoff as a coach. It really is. And it's not to say that the parents shouldn't be 100% involved in this process. They should be. But most of the time it's going to be their money. right? So yes, they have major skin in the game. But at the end of the day, it's the kid's experience, and the kid needs to be at the forefront of the process. And specifically, anything baseball related, it needs to come out of the kid's mouth. Well-being, academics, finances, mom and dad have at it. But the other part of this, I think, is important, is that if the parents are at the forefront of this, it's telling me that the kid doesn't have the self-confidence to ask those questions and communicate with a coach. And that is also a red flag, because self-confidence is a huge part of success when you get to in baseball, period. But when you get to the college level, having some self-confidence, because there's inevitable failure that is going to happen. And a kid who can shake your hand well and look you in the eye and ask you some good questions, and you can tell that that kid's prepared, you can tell that kid's invested in the moment and he's actually actively participating. That's the type of kid that coaches want to coach, because that's the kid who's going to show up every day with a good attitude. That's the kid who's going to show up every day trying to better himself. And yeah, I know some kids are shyer than others, but if you need to make sure that your son is at the forefront of the baseball conversation, and it doesn't become a parent dominated visit. It's it's a tough thing to have to tell people, because I don't want to discount how important it is that the parent plays a big role in the process. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, the player needs to be the focus. And yeah, I mean, you said it a couple times, so I'm going to steal your thunder on this one. But at no point in time has a coach ever written a parent's name in the lineup. So understand, you can have a really positive influence on this process, but if it becomes a we versus your son going through the process, it can be a turnoff for coaches, and something that could have a negative impact on the interaction. And I would encourage the player to empower themselves and take some ownership over this, because if they do lead, it can set a really good tone for those interactions and for what that visit ultimately looks like.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. There's no, I do think it's a little bit of a rough, blunt conversation that we're having here, and it's more designed from an educational standpoint of, like, these are the things that coaches are looking for when you're on the visit, and these are the things that could ultimately be a decision maker for them. If all things are equal and they're recruiting two shortstops, and one was super prepared on the visit with a lot of questions and seemed very interested, and then the other one was, maybe wasn't disinterested, but it certainly seemed that way with who was asking the questions and who was dominating the conversation, they're likely going to lead towards the one who seemed very interested and, led the conversation from a student athlete standpoint. So, it's little things like that, in these types of situations and scenarios, like, these are the razor thin margins when you're talking about, getting roster spots or getting scholarship money, and ultimately ending up at programs that you might want to, and it could be something like that. And, at the end of the day, and I don't know if you've said it here or on other podcasts that, tonight, but the coaches are recruiting, you're recruiting the programs just as much as the coaches are recruiting you, so they're trying to figure out if this is going to be a good fit for them to have you in their program. And these are things that, you're there because they think from a skill set standpoint, you fit in. Now it's figuring out everything else. And this is one of the hardest things we've talked about before. The character piece and the fitting into the program and all those things are some of the harder things to kind of figure out in this process. And these are things that can start to lead coaches in a different direction if, it's a parent dominated conversation from a baseball standpoint. Again, from a financial aid, support, everything standpoint, jump in, ask questions. You want to make sure that your mind is put at ease when you're on these visits, to know that if this ends up being the school that your son chooses, that they have everything in place for them to really thrive outside of baseball. But you want your son to be able to get to the determination himself that from a baseball standpoint, this is a school where I feel as though I'm going to fit in from a program standpoint. I'm going to fit in with the coaching staff. They can develop me. I'm going to be able to get better, and I'm going to have an opportunity, because there's not a coach in the country that's going to sit down in front of you and be like, hey, you're going to walk in here and start day one. Like the likely answer is going to be like, you're going to have a chance and an opportunity every day to show that you have the chance to be a starter in this program. But it's going to be an everyday thing. And that's more or less going to be the answer. It might be in different words and different terminology, but that's kind of going to be the blanket answer you're going to get. You can ask like, hey, when do you see me playing? Like, well, hey, you could play as a freshman. In 2019, I ran out 7 freshmen. It wasn't by design. It was just they went in and competed every day, and they were really good. And, we had a pretty good year. So, you're going to have the opportunity every day, and that's generally going to be the answer you're going to get. But, I digress for a second. When you're on the visits, you want to make sure that these are the things that you're kind of keeping in mind, so that you're giving the college coaches everything in your power to say, like, this is the kid, this is the family that we want to bring into our program, because everything's going to be good.
I think we nailed that topic, Coach. I'm going to go ahead and give you a pat on the back there. I think we covered that one pretty good. Anything else you want to add?
No, put a bow on it.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.